welcome back to Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is Brewing with Underwhelming Commanders, a series I used to do on my channel almost on a weekly basis. I used to do it a lot, and then it sort of became once a month, and then I stopped doing it entirely for a variety of reasons, but I still like to revisit it from time to time, and of course, I just build an absolute ton of decks on my own personal time, which is the reason I made my channel in the first place. And so once in a while, I like to throw out one of these videos where I've made some decks with some underwhelming commanders. As I've talked about in a video recently, talking about how the format has sped up quite a bit, there really isn't any underwhelming commanders anymore. Even the ones that are difficult to build around, there's so much support in every theme that even the underwhelming ones are not so underwhelming anymore. But still, certainly unpopular commanders, right? I got 3 commanders here that are, and I would say traditionally would be considered an underwhelming commander. Maybe not the easiest to build around, but also commanders that are very unpopular. And I've built some pretty interesting decks here. Going to start out with Zareth San, the Trickster, a commander I've talked about on my channel quite a bit. I don't know if I've actually ever made a deck with it on my channel, though. I may have. I made a bit of a different one here. This is, and as you will see, I mean, basically the way I build decks is more method to now, where I come up with an idea and then I find a commander that fits. All of these are definitely the commander that you are using. You're definitely going to want to have to use. This is a case where I sort of had an idea, and that idea became a Zareth San idea. And basically the idea is essentially a changeling deck. So 3 blue and a black, Merfolk Rogue 4/4 with flash, pay 2 blue and a black, return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to owner's hand. Put Zareth San, the Trickster, from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Also has flash. I don't know how often you're going to be wanting to flash this out. It is obviously a great thing to have on a commander, but because of that other ninjutsu-esque ability, you won't be using it that much, I don't think. When Zareth San deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard into the battlefield under your control. That seems pretty darn good, right? For me, that's just a value play. I'm not going to build around that at all. I didn't with this deck. A lot of people might be looking at this commander and thinking, okay, well, I got to mill my opponents. No, you don't. You just have your commander come into play and you get the Evolving Wilds out of your opponent's graveyard and put into play under your control. That alone seems like pretty good value to me. Also, any creature or other permanent that you destroy then is a target for your commander. Of course, any commander referring to a specific creature type on it is going to be an opportunity to do the changeling theme. The reason why I revisited this one in particular is because we got Soulstone Sanctuary in Foundations. We now have 3 effects like this. The land that turns into a creature of all creature types, a changeling, essentially. So Soulstone Sanctuary, you can pay 4, and it becomes a 3/3 creature with vigilance in all creature types, so it's a rogue. Faceless Haven, pay 3 snow mana, and of course, we have snowlands in here. Faceless Haven becomes a 4/3 creature with vigilance and all creature types until end of turn. And Mutavault, of course, the OG that does this. You just pay 1 and it becomes a 2/2 with all creature types. This is, I would say, like 70% built around our commander. It's mostly, the priority here is a changeling theme, and it's actually probably more built around the 3 lands. But of course, our commander's taking advantage of that. We can attack with our Mutavault, right? We see someone who's open, turn our Mutavault into a creature, attack them. Out comes our commander, right? We pick up our Mutavault, no problem. We'll just play it again on our second main phase. It's probably the easiest way to use our commander's ability, in fact. And then we steal something out of their graveyard. I know people will say, you can't use that ability from the command zone. You would be correct. I would probably flash out my commander earlier in the game and then return it to hand and use the other ability, or you can just attack with it. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this. I put Haunted Crossroads in the deck because if our commander ever dies, we can just put it back on top of our library and draw it and then use the commander Rogitsu or whatever from our hand. I also have stuff like Cowardice in the deck, which whenever a creature becomes target of a spell or ability, return that creature to owner's hand. Hey, that's really bad for our opponents. Not so bad for us, right? We actually are okay with returning our creatures to hand. Umbiculous as well. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player returns a permanent they control the owner's hand unless they pay 2 life. So people can pay the 2 life. For us, we'll return our commander to our hand, right? So we can flash it out, return it to our hand, and then start using that ability. You can't just attack with it, right? I mean, there is a pretty good chance that you're going to be able to get in for damage with this commander, I think. Obviously, we have Maskwood Nexus in the deck. I mean, you certainly don't need it. There are a lot of rogues in this deck, so you can just play your rogues like you normally would with this deck and use your commander. But again, this is just the way I build decks now. I build decks so that you don't absolutely need your commander. If your commander gets exiled a few times, you're not just sitting there spinning your wheels. And this is certainly a deck where I can just play with Maskwood Nexus, right? I can just have changelings come into play. Black market connections, right? It makes a changeling token. So we have changelings in the deck that we can build around as well. And then, of course, we have the stuff that takes advantage of that. I have an Azami, so now I can tap any of my changelings to draw a card. I have a Gale Rider Sliver, so all of my changelings now have flying. I have a Merfolk Sovereign, so now all my changelings have +1/+1, and I can make one of them unblockable until end of turn, which of course works great with our commander. But also, once we get our commander out, we can throw a Runed Stalactite on it. I don't know if you guys know this card existed. I actually discovered it making this deck. So 1 mana equipment with equip 2. Equip creature gets +1/+1. It is every creature type. So we can put this on our commander, and now our commander becomes a changeling. There's actually 2 options here. Amorphous Axe is another one. 2 mana equipment with equip 3. Equip creature gets +3/+0 and is every creature type. So we put this on our commander. Our commander's now a 7/4, and we got a Gale Rider Sliver out. It now has flying, so now we're getting in for 7 damage every turn with our commander, and then on top of that, we get to steal a permanent out of their graveyard. That seems pretty good, right? So there is a lot of things you can do with this deck. It is, I would say, fairly focused on the commander, but at the same time, you would be okay without having your commander in place, certainly. It's a pretty neat deck, I think. Next up, we got a background commander, Ellyn Harbreeze. And Ellyn Harbreeze is certainly one of those commanders that I would imagine is way more popular in the 99. I might have this in the 99 2 decks of mine. It is obviously a card you could put in any token theme. I don't think a lot of people have Ellyn Harbreeze in the command zone, but I made a pretty neat deck here. So 3 and a white human peasant, 2/4. Tap, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of tokens you created this turn. Put one of those cards in your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. And of course, we need a background here. The background I chose is Far Traveler, which might seem like a really weird fit. And of course, doesn't work great with our commander, or does it? Like, again, as I get into it, you'll understand my choice here. So 2 and a white background, commander creatures you own have at the beginning of your end step exile up to 1 target tapped creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under owner's control. And I know people will say, okay, well, it works great with your commander because you can tap your commander and then blink it. Yeah, but why would we want to blink our commander? It has a tap ability. Blinking it doesn't do anything. I guess it's like an untap effect. We can untap our commander, but now it's summoning 6, so we can't tap it. Of course, the Far Traveler is not in here to be used with our commander. Both cards are working with the thing we're doing in our deck. Again, this is a little more method 2, although in this case, we definitely really want our commander out, and we do want the Far Traveler out. We are definitely using them both, although this deck started with, again, I had an idea, and then I found a commander that fit it. I started with Springjack Shepherd. I don't know why I'm so obsessed with this card. I was doing some research for a deck, I think, came across the Chroma ability. It's a funny old ability that was essentially the initial Devotion ability, except Devotion only deals with permanents on the battlefield, whereas Chroma, I mean, not this card, but there are some Chroma cards that deal with, you know, cards in your hand or in your graveyard and stuff like that. So it's kind of like Devotion, but of course, because Devotion is maybe a little more fitting in the game of Magic, Chroma has been completely abandoned. I seriously doubt they'll ever revisit it. So Springjack Shepherd is 3 and a white Kithkin Wizard, 1/2. Has this Chroma ability. Whenever it enters, create a 0/1 white goat creature token for each white mana symbol in the mana cost of permanents you control, also known as Devotion, right? It's exactly like Devotion. This specific one on Springjack Shepherd. Chroma isn't always like Devotion. This ability is exactly like Devotion. And I started thinking, again, this is where a lot of my ideas come up with, is I just have a really good memory for cards. And I started thinking, well, is there like a couple other cards that deal with Devotion and also make tokens? And again, when I'm building around a certain theme, I want a few options for what I'm doing. I don't love building around one card or even two cards in the 99. It gets difficult. Once I get to a certain threshold, now it becomes a thing. Reverent Hoplite, 4 and a white, human soldier, 1/2. When it enters, create a number of 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. So here's another card that's making a bunch of tokens that is also dealing with essentially devotion. And we also got Evangel of Heliod, 4 white, white, human cleric, 1/3. When Evangel of Heliod enters, create a number of 1/1 white soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. So we have 3 cards that are essentially doing the same thing. They ETB and they create a bunch of tokens. So from that, you can probably figure out why I chose the commander and background that I did. Of course, Ellyn Harbreeze wants us to be creating a bunch of tokens. Again, it's more of a go wide thing. We're not creating one big token, we're creating a whole bunch of tiny little tokens. And for that reason, if we create 5 tokens, we can look at the top 5 cards of our library and put one into your hand. And man, you can really, really go off with this deck, I will just say. It takes a little, assembling to happen, but you really can go to town here. Of course, Far Traveler is doing the blinking thing, and all 3 of those creatures we want to reuse. So we want to tap them, and then on our end step, we will blink them and they'll come back into play. And this can work particularly well with our commander. If I have Springjack Shepherd come into play, let's say I create 5 goat tokens. If I can tap it, and of course, we have a whole bunch of ways to tap creatures in this deck, obviously, that's a very important theme here as well. I'm really combining a lot of themes here. Tokens, blinking, and tapping. All 3 of those are in this deck. Now, I'm not going to use my Ellyn Harbreeze. I'm going to tap my Springjack Shepherd, blink it on my end step. It comes back into play. I make 5 more tokens. Then on my end step, I will use my Ellyn Harbreeze because now I'm going to look at the top 10 cards of my library and put one in my hand. I mean, I only get to put one in my hand, but man, looking at the top 10 cards, you really get to dig into your deck to get the cards you need. It works really, really well. Of course, because we're doing the devotion thing, we do want to put some white pips in here. You'll see cards like Phyrexian Vindicator and it'll be like, what's that doing in the deck? It's just a really good card, but it also has the 4 white pips. I did put a few cards in this deck that just have a lot of pips because, of course, all 3 cards that we're building around here care about the devotion. Light from Within is a funny one, and I've played this deck quite a bit online. I was actually seriously considering putting together for myself in paper. I already have 3 mono white decks though. And this is a card I've mentioned on my 10 card series and will likely mention again on my 10 card series that sees almost no play at all. And funny enough, has the Chroma ability, is another one of those cards that has the Chroma ability that when I get it on the battlefield, it is such a removal magnet. People are like, never seen that card before, but yet it becomes a removal magnet pretty quickly because people realize how powerful it can be. So 2 white, white enchantment. Each creature you control gets +1/+1 for each white mana symbol in its mana cost. So most creatures are just going to get a +1/+1. Some creatures are going to get a +2/+2. Your Phyrexian Vindicator is going to get a +4/+4. This guy's a 9/9 flyer when your Light from Within is on the battlefield. So that's a pretty funny fit in the deck. Again, we're playing around the devotion theme here a little bit as well. Of course, we got the blinking. You'll see lots of blinking stuff in this deck, Conjurer's Closet, all that good stuff. Of course, our background is also doing that. So we don't need an absolute ton, but having a little bit more is good. You will also, of course, see other creatures that are ETBing and creating tokens. Obviously, I'm doing a lot of that. I'm blinking and I'm creating tokens. Those are the 2 main themes of the deck because those are what our commander and our background are doing. So Abdel Adrian enters the battlefield and creates tokens, also blinks other stuff. So obviously it's a slam dunk. Harmonious Archon enters the battlefield and creates 2 1/1 white human creature tokens, but also non-Archon creatures, base power, toughness 3/3, right? All those not so menacing tokens we are making all of a sudden now become 3/3s. They get a lot better, right? Again, we're in the tapping theme. I threw Wandering Rescuer in here because tapped creatures you control have hexproof, and it is very easy for us to instant speed tap our creatures down, but we are also in the untapping theme, funny enough. So I got Magerite Stone in here. So of course, again, we can only get 1 card with our commander's ability. So it is important because we won't be doing it a lot, but we'll have like 7 tokens come into play. We tap our commander, look at the top 7, put 1 in our hand. Really important that we can untap our commander and then do it again. So we're getting more cards in hand. And again, you're digging so deep into your deck. You really can go absolutely nuts with this deck sometimes. Of course, 1,000-Year Elixir is probably going to be the most important. One of the most, for sure, important cards in your deck outside of the 3 cards that we're kind of building around here. Because, of course, it's going to let you use your commander's ability right away. And also you can untap it to use it again. And in particular, here, now this does work with our background, right? Of course, our commander, when we tap it, on the end step, we can blink it. And when we blink it, again, it comes into play untapped. And if we have our 1,000-year elixir, now we can use it again. So that's another way we can use our commander's ability again. And of course, it taps itself, so we don't have to worry about that part. So if our 1,000-year elixir is in play, again, let's pretend we made 4 tokens. I will tap my Ellyn Harbreeze. I'll look at the top 4 cards, put one in my hand. I'll then untap it with my 1,000-year elixir. Look at the top 4 cards in my library, put one in my hand. I've looked 8 deep and put 2 cards in my hand. Go to the end step, blink my commander with my background. It comes back into play, and then on the end step, again, you can't wait because it's this turn, the tokens that you have created. But because of my 1,000-year elixir, I can activate it as soon as it enters the battlefield. So now I will again tap it. So now I've got 3 activations off of my commander. I've looked 12 deep into my library and put 3 cards into my hand. That's pretty darn good, I think. I also have Crashing Drawbridge in the deck as well for the same similar reason, but it also does a lot more. So Crashing Drawbridge, I will have, I mean, as long as it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, I can have my commander get blinked on the end step, or any other time, really. I can cast an Ephemerate on my opponent's turn if I want to, or something, right? I likely won't be making tokens on my opponent's turn, but it is a possibility. But here, I can blink my commander on the end step, and then tap my Crashing Drawbridge, give all my creatures haste, so I can use my commander's ability right away. That's another way that I can do it. But also Crashing Drawbridge is great because obviously I can have my Evangel of Heliod make 1,000,000 tokens and then tap my Crashing Drawbridge and they can immediately swing, right? So it can help with closing out the game as well. Couple other really neat ways for closing out the game. Again, those 1/1 tokens or those 0/1 goats are not very menacing. Devout Invocation, 6 and a white sorcery. Tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying for each creature tapped this way. So funny enough, not only does this give us a way to close out the game, but it's also tapping our creatures. So we can take advantage of that as well. And Angelic Aberration was literally made for this deck idea, I think. 4 and a white Eldrazi Angel. 4/4 Devoid Flying Vigilance when it enters the battlefield. So again, we have an ETB. This is something we can use more than once. Sacrifice any number of creatures with base power or toughness, 1 or less. So literally all the tokens that we are making. Create that many 4/4 colorless Eldrazi Angel creature tokens with flying and vigilance. So another really great way to help close out the game. Really neat deck. Again, I was really close to putting this one together in paper myself. I think it's a fantastic one. Also, though, I was really considering putting together in paper this last one I'm talking about here, because I actually don't have a Gruul deck at all. I got lots of mono white decks, don't have a Gruul one. The Lady of Otaria is certainly, I would say, an underwhelming commander, not very popular at all. Again, even with all of the support we have in different themes, one theme we haven't got a lot of support in maybe is Gruul Dwarves. This is a very unpopular commander, but I think I made a pretty neat deck here. So 3 red and a green Avatar 5/5. You may tap 3 untapped dwarves you control rather than pay the spell's mana cost. That ain't nothing. That's pretty good, being able to get your commander out for free. I don't know if there's any other commander that does that. So, of course, for that reason, we have to put dwarves in this deck, and also for the last ability, we have to put dwarves in the deck. At the beginning of each end step, if a land you controlled was put in a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, reveal the top 4 cards of your library. You may put any number of dwarf cards from among them into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in random order. And it's kind of funny how the 2 ideas I talked about first, a little bit of both kind of converge into what I'm talking about here, because of course the changeling thing is going to work here. We will be doing this a little bit because, of course, as I just said, whenever you have a commander that has a creature type that is talked about in its text, you can start looking at the changeling thing to fit in there as well. But also, we're digging into our deck here, which is exactly what, I mean, it's funny how this ability is very similar to what Ellyn Harbreeze is doing. So we have to put dwarves in the deck because, of course, we kind of want to cast our commander for free. I'd say it's definitely a great way to go here. You can get your commander out pretty damn fast. Again, I've play tested this deck quite a bit because I was thinking of putting it together in paper myself, and you really can get your commander out quickly. And the reason why you would want to do this is a deck where you'd want to do that because, of course, that last ability triggers on each end step. So you can really start going to town, digging into your deck to get what you're looking for. So I do have a fair amount of dwarves. They're not great. One of the reasons why this commander is not very popular is, of course, dwarves are not a great tribe in the commander format. Another reason is because then you have that lands theme and they don't seem to play well together. Doing the lands thing with the dwarves, like, huh, what? The deck I came up with, though, is really neat. This is certainly a deck that is built around the commander. You could be okay without the commander here. Our commander is an assist. This is the way I love to build decks now, is my commander is assisting me in what I am doing. This is certainly, I would say, a dwarf tribal deck. There's a lot of dwarves in the deck, but our commander, mainly the purpose of our commander here is that last ability, digging into our deck to get what we're looking for. And the way we do that is by getting our commander out quickly. So we're going to cast a couple of dwarves. And of course, there's lots of cheap ones. I put the 7 dwarves in here, right? So I got 7 of the 7 dwarves in here. That's another little added sort of fringe thing that is happening in the deck. I get my commander out, and as soon as I cast my commander, I'm going to Ghost Quarter somebody. As an example, right? I want a land to leave the battlefield, so I get that trigger immediately on the end step. And of course, this is each end step. So I got lots of ways for lands to be leaving. I actually didn't do this as much originally, but I realized how valuable this could be, constantly refilling your hand and digging for the cards we need. Petrified Field, right? I can sacrifice this to return a land from my graveyard to my hand. So now on the next opponent's turn, I'm going to sack my Petrified Field, get my Ghost Quarter back, then I get a trigger off my commander, and then I replay the Ghost Quarter on my turn, and then I shoot another land of my opponent's, get another trigger, right? So we're going to be doing a lot of that. Sylvan Safekeeper, great way to get triggers on other opponents' turns because, of course, they'll target your commander or whatever, sack a land, give it Shroud, and then I get a trigger on the end step. Dire Strain Rampage. There's a million ways to do this. You can have lands that sacrifice themselves. You can sacrifice your own lands. You can have an effect like this that will, I mean, it destroys an artifact, enchantment, or land, but as I discovered about this card, it actually is a ramp option. So you can destroy a land you control, and then you search your library for 2 basic land cards and put it on the battlefield tapped. So that is a land that has left the battlefield, right? So that will trigger your commander. We're ramping, but we're also triggering our commander when we do it. Of course, we got lots of lands going to the graveyard, so we need that Crucible of Worlds effects. We do have Crucible of Worlds in the deck. We also have Ramanap Excavator in the deck. It is very important that we have a creature version of this and an artifact version of this, and that's because we have Magda Brazen Outlaw. This is kind of a secret commander deck for Magda Brazen Outlaw. And I mean, obviously we could put more creature search in the deck. I have a couple of creature search options where we can just put Magda directly into play. The fact that Magda wants your dwarves to be tapping and the Lady of Otaria is tapping your dwarves is just like, it's almost like they were wanting that to happen. But there's so much, it's so funny. As I was playing this deck, I started discovering accidentally, I kind of had this combo assembled, but also then I started discovering other strategies, and it's really neat. One of the neatest combos I've ever come up with, and I came up with it kind of by accident. So, of course, Magda says other dwarves you control get +1/+0. Obviously, if you're building a Lady of Otaria deck, this is just an auto-include because it's already a dwarf tribal commander, right? Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. That's the big one. Actually, maybe even the bigger one is sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, and put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle. So we want this to come into play. We want to tap down a bunch of our dwarves, and we want to be able to get 5 treasures so that we can get that last ability. And what are we going to go look for? Of course, we're going to go look for a Maskwood Nexus. This is another Maskwood Nexus deck. But of course, here we have a pretty decent way to search for it, right? We're digging into our deck with our Lady of Otaria to get to our Magda. I mean, maybe we'll draw our Maskwood Nexus too. But we get to our Magda, we play our Magda, and of course, we can tap it down very easily. We don't have to tap down Magda, we tap down any dwarves, right? Dwarven Blood Boiler is another really important card in this deck because it allows you to tap down your dwarves. Tap an untapped dwarf you control, target creature gets +2/+0 until end of turn. So if you already have this in play, I play my Magda, I immediately tap 5 dwarves, give some creature a big power, and smash my opponents with it. It's also a way to help close out the game. I then use Magda to go get my Maskwood Nexus. Now this has a double effect here, okay? Effect number 1 is, of course, all my creatures are dwarves now. So that means, including in my deck, when my commander triggers on the end step, now I can get any creature into my hand, right? It also gets a lot better with the Magda because, of course, every time I tap any creature now, I'm creating a treasure token. So it's a compounding benefit here with what we're doing. It also gets better because, of course, Magda allows you to search for dragon cards as well. So with a Maskwood Nexus in play, all of our creatures in our library are also dragons. So this now allows us to search for any creature in our library. And of course, that's why I have a Ramanap Excavator and a Crucible of Worlds. So now, if we want to go get an artifact that gets lands out of our graveyard, we get the Crucible of Worlds. If we want to go get a creature that gets lands out of our graveyard, we get the Ramanap Excavator. And of course, you will be wanting to do that because you want to keep Ghost Quartering every turn, right? Things get even sillier here. And of course, I threw a Seedborn Muse in this deck because we are tapping down our creatures a lot, right? And we can go tutor for it. Once we have our Maskwood Nexus in play, you can go get any creature you want and throw it directly into play. And once the Seedborn Muse gets in play, things really start getting out of hand, of course, because now I can start tapping down my creatures on other players' turns and creating more treasure tokens and go get more. Again, we're at a point now where I can go get any artifact or any creature out of my library and put it directly into play. Not bad. Let's go get a Bootlegger Stash. This is pretty good in the deck, right? 5 and a green artifact. Lands you control have tap, create a treasure token. This is a card that people really lost their minds over when it first came out. Actually doesn't see much play in the Commander format, but is a pretty great fit here because, of course, it gives us more treasure tokens that we can use for our Magda, and it's an artifact we can fetch. I thought, what's a good artifact I can fetch that cranks out treasure tokens? This is certainly one. However, things get really out of hand with the accidental combo that I created. I thought, wouldn't it be funny if we could turn our creatures into lands? Because of course, then if I have one of my dwarves die, I will get a trigger off my commander on the end step because I had a land go to the right. I was trying to figure out how do I get more triggers off my commander. I didn't put a Dryad Arbor in this deck, but I guess I could. Dryad Arbor is a land and a creature. So of course, if I chump with it, it's going to the graveyard. That's a land going to the graveyard. I'll get a trigger off my commander on the end step. Well, as it happens, there is a card that turns your creatures into lands. A Shaya Soul of the Wild, right? 3 green elemental, has power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control, so it's going to be a big boy. But also, non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. Hey, that's fantastic. So that means if any of our creatures die, and we even have some creatures that can sacrifice themselves here, we will get a trigger off our commander. Well, hold on a second. Didn't I just talk about Bootlegger Stash is already in the deck? This is another accidental combo that I discovered where things get completely out of hand. Of course, lands you control, tap to create a treasure token, and our Ashaya is making our creatures into lands. So with those two cards in play, and I don't know if anyone puts Bootlegger Stash in their Ashaya deck, maybe they should. I know your creatures are already tapping for green mana, but now essentially they tap for any mana because you can tap any of your creatures now to create a treasure token, which also works with Magda because you want to be tapping your creatures, right? It all works together. Where if I have Magda and the Maskwood Nexus and Ashaya and the Bootlegger Stash in play, and I know that sounds like a lot, but when you can tutor for these pieces, it's not that difficult. What it becomes is all of your creatures can now tap to create a treasure token, but when they become tapped, you create another treasure token, and then you can use those treasure tokens to go fetch any creature or artifact out of your library and put it directly into play. And I put certain artifacts and creatures in the deck that I thought were pretty good. Put Eldrazi Monument in here, like someone goes to board wipe, I go fetch my Eldrazi Monument, now my creatures are indestructible, helps close out the game. You could put whatever you want in, right? Any creature or artifact you could put in the deck because this becomes this ridiculous combo where I'm making a ton of mana and I'm being able to fetch any artifact or creature I want out of my library and put it directly into play. Pretty neat. It is a little difficult to assemble. Sometimes you really got to dig. The Magda is pretty crucial here. Without the Magda, it doesn't work great. However, again, you can get like the Ashaya and the Bootlegger Stash in play. That's pretty good too, right? Maybe you can come up with some other things that'll work great here. I just thought it was funny. I remember I was playing this and I put the Ashaya in because I thought, okay, it would be funny if someone kills one of my creatures and then I get the trigger off my commander on the end step because a land left the battlefield. And I realized when I went to click on it, I'm like, oh wait, it's now a land, so the Bootlegger Stash means I can tap it to make a treasure. And of course, because I'm tapping it to make a treasure, it makes a treasure with Magda. Like it just all works so nicely together. It is 100% a combo deck, but at the same time, the Lady of Otaria is actually pretty important here, I would say. You could get away with not casting it for the whole game, I guess, but I don't know why you'd want to. You can cast it for free. You got so many dwarves in the deck that it's very easy for you to just tap down 3 of them and have your commander come into play and then start digging through your deck. You could take this deck, though, and I guess maybe do a different commander and just put a whole bunch more green tutors in the deck and go to town that way. But I really like the deck I built here. Again, very unassuming because, of course, this is a commander that nobody plays, and it certainly is an underwhelming commander. Even with all the support we have now, I think this is still an underwhelming commander in the format. Really neat deck I put together here, I think. Super interesting combo. Deck list is in the description below, as well as for the other two decks as well. All three of these decks are pretty great. I was giving some serious consideration to all three of them for myself. All essentially underwhelming commanders, even though all of these decks, I would say, are more towards the method too, where there's this thing you're doing in your deck and your commander is assisting with that. You know, in some cases more than others, but I would say all of these decks, as I like to build decks now, all of them would be okay if you never cast your commander. However, your commander is definitely going to help move things along. You guys let me know in the comments below if you're going to go after any of these yourself. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.